Hey guys, so I wanted to talk about this deck that topped in premium format, and it got third place in a format of Highlander, Steam Maidens, and actually I didn't see any Eradicator decks, so that was kind of interesting. But I've been seeing this deck pop up once or twice, and at first I was a little confused. I've seen a couple variants of this. I thought it was really creative, and I thought it might have been a budget build, but like looking at it more closely now, I'm kind of discerning more of the purpose of it. I also like this just because like it's really good. Ooh, don't like that though. 10 grade 3s is nasty. Oh no, wait, no, it's 13. That's fine. So let's digest this deck piece by piece. So yeah, this is going to be a Cradle focus build. For those that don't know, Cradle is a mechanic where it makes a unit lose their abilities and their power is reduced by their original power. It doesn't paralyze, but it's a mechanic that was introduced in Megacolony in V Premium. So basically, the goal is to ride this Dark Face, and if your opponent has any rear guards, then you can cradle it on top of cradling a rear guard even before you stride. So that's it's a really neat application, and it was one of the reasons why I saw it as a card like that. It was a really good potential like grade 3 starter. You can also call it from the deck with Gridora as well because it's a Vanguard or Rearguard skill. So there's like multiple applications for having 4 of these in your deck. It's not just like a one and done, like you ride it and you exclusively ride it. No Zoa, which makes sense, but let's go back to the main deck and look through it. The grade 2 lineup is really interesting, but I'm going to look at that in a bit. Let's start with the triggers, and I guess order card. Blitz is a new staple, and for those that aren't like actively in the scene, basically this was a Blitz order introduced as a promo in Overdress. I believe it was included with the set 6 trial decks, the I can't even call it Skyfall, Protofall, Leonorn, and Dredgewald. Basically, if your opponent's Vanguard has triple drive, you can play for free. So basically, it not only gives us an extra slot in the trigger department, but it also allows us to basically guard a G unit for free. Pretty standard Quinagria. You're never really going to be using this early except against Rush. Overtrigger Bless Favor. Yeah, there's not really a lot of application for the normal Overtrigger. The thing that stands out the most right now is the Alana. And this is actually really smart. The reason they included Alana is because this gives you soul before you hit grade 3. And the reason why that's important is because there's a lot of cards in this build that use soul. And soul is one of the important costs when like dealing with this deck. So like Sweet Cocktail, Intrude Scissors, all of these are going to be soul, Brilliant Blister, and then you're also going to be using these during your opponent's turn. So you need some kind of soul, not to mention Gridora, obviously, but you know, you're also getting the soul off of Malignantus. So if you're using the Malignantus skill, you're usually going to have a soul for Gridora. But that also brings me to the grade 1 lineup. The first thing that stands out here is that there is only one countercharger in this build. And I plan to talk about this in a Megacolony episode, but one of the reasons why Megacolony usually plays anyways, like Butterfly Officer and High Class Moth, or Stealth Millipede and High Class Moth, or like Makeup Widow and High Class Moth, is because there's a lot of cards that cost, and they don't really do a lot, but it's required. You just kind of have to use it in order to like get any advantage or control over your opponent. Kind of an all or nothing. So having only one in the build is really interesting. I also find it interesting that they run a lot of 3-ofs in this deck. It looks like they were really trying to be able to fit all of these optional control options in, which I think is really smart, because in this format there's a lot of different decks we're dealing with. We're dealing with Ride Down, Highlander, Steve. Yeah, although a lot of people are moving off of Steve, or not Steve, but Narukami in general. I don't know why. The deck's still really good, but eh. There is no Dorcas in the deck, which means that you kind of have to just draw a lot of this. But with how many grade 1 cards there are, you are at least pretty much guaranteed the first ride. To talk about it a little bit more, Clear Breeze is a mulligan. But if you mulligan a grade 3, then you can cradle a rear guard. You can't cradle a rear guard that's already cradled, but yeah, that's different. They probably included the old blister because there are some restanders in the format. I want to re-emphasize that, I don't know why this is so small, but basically, when you put it in a Guardian Circle, you can choose your opponent's Vanguard, and it can't restand during this turn. So it prevents restanding on the Vanguard, but it doesn't prevent like Ride Over, which is one of the reasons why I don't play it right now, because I think Ride Over is more prevalent than restanding, but obviously it depends on the deck you're playing. There are people that can just go into Descendant. There are people that can do the X, and you don't want to get OTK by the X, so yeah, running this is like pretty neat, and since you have the space in the grade 1s, you might as well run the blister lineup. The Beauty Tugging the Sleeve, or I don't know why I call that Sleeve Tugging Bell. It's a very good Narukami countermeasure, and also with the deck, it's also a really good option, but I'll get to that in a bit. Now to talk a bit about the more niche side, Morasorio. So this is a hard resourcing card, and the reason why is because this person is playing a lot of cradles everywhere, like literally everywhere. If I had to guess, they're probably playing with a focus to ride on Sweet Cocktail. And basically, when you retire a unit, or when a unit with a cradle marker is retired, you can search your deck for a card with the same grade as the card called, or for the card added. What this card does is you can retire it, and you can retire the opponent's cradle early, and basically you get to superior call from your deck something with the same grade. Obviously, you can't choose what grade your opponent's going to play, and it depends on the deck as well, so it's kind of matchup dependent. But this is where we see a little bit more of the niche stuff in the deck kind of stand out. We actually have the Alana, so we have something that can stuff into Soul, like if we need to retire a grade 0. We have the Battler S, which is a pretty neat card. It's a grade 2 we can call if we need a copy of it in the drop zone and we kind of just want a niche grade 2 to place. We could put a red stamping, which I believe, yep, it's on place, not when it's put from hand. We can also just call a Sweet Cocktail, Blister, Bounce to hand. We could call a Dark Face to rearguard, or we could call the Intrude Scissors ahead of time. There's a lot of neat options in the deck, and in this format, I think this kind of adds to the overall win con of the deck, because rushing is really strong right now. I think rushing is really good. There's one deck I don't want to fight against, and it's the deck that I think this one is weakest against. specifically Regalia, but there's not a lot you can do about it. This deck at least makes up somewhat in defensive pressure, which is nice. But yeah. Looking at the grade 2 lineup, I'm not going to go over it too much because I've talked about it a good bit. I'm not even going to go over Blister because people should know what Blister does. You Soul Blast 1 and discard a card during the guard step, and your opponent's rearguard can't stand. You can only use this skill if your opponent's vanguard is rest. Yep. And it can't stand until the end of the turn. Also, it can bounce to hand if it's in the back row rearguard and the opponent doesn't have any stored rearguards. Yep. Sweet Cocktail. It's a really good card. If you ride on top of it, you can cradle a rearguard, and when you guard with it or attack a grade 2 or greater vanguard from rear, you can Soul Blast 1 and choose one of your opponent's stood rearguards and retire it. Remember that it's a grade 2 or greater, so if you're going first and you decide to go to grade 2, you cannot use the skill for a Sweet Cocktail on rearguard. Very interesting that I see a lot of people running the Stamping Red. I think running the Stamping Red and the Giraffe means that you have more options for advantage, and then on top of Sweet Cocktail is pretty good. I think it's a little bit rough, with High Class Moth being not only a 3 of, but not having any other counter charges in the deck besides Malig. And from what I understand, yes, so this card calls from the... Alright, so let's go over this card, because I went over this a long time ago when Uradrafa came out, but I know I haven't talked about it here. So, when it's put on rearguard, you can Soul Blast 1, and your opponent chooses a card from their hand and call it to rearguard as rest. They draw a card, and the called card cannot be stood during the next stand phase. It's basically paralyzed. So, this is probably just to get Cradles out. Because it has to be placed on rearguard, that means you don't really... I don't know why it's not placed on vanguard or rearguard, but whatever. Who cares? Yeah. Because it has to be placed on rearguard, there's no way to get it out before Darkface is there. But if you do get them out, then you could probably use Stamping Red and Morisorio to get a quick Cradle search. Because there's not a lot of options to get rid of Cradle cards. Good note, because Sweet Cocktail can retire a stood rearguard, it can also retire a Cradle, because most people don't attack with the card that's cradled. I think a more valid application would be to use the Malignantes to retire the card and get the counter charge and draw, because that's advantage. That also gives you Soul. Plus you get the search off of the Cradle. So it's technically a +1. Let's see. Yeah. So you're not just losing board in hand. Yeah. You get a +1 off that. Yeah. So there's some niche combo things you can do with this. Because you have such a wide grade 1 lineup, you can also discard any of these cards to access the Battler S. It's also a decent discard target for Clear Breeze. If you don't need to discard Hell Demise or Ancient Scissors to shuffle back with Gentle Moth. Yeah, there's a lot of neat things you can do there. Specifically because it looks like it wants to try to mess around with destroying the opponent's hand pressure. I think giving the opponent the option to mulligan what they want is very dangerous, but I think that with the right planning, you can definitely get some nasty hand pressure, like searching Paralyzed Madonna if they try to call a trigger, or getting Blister to hand, and then you call it, for example, and like you have more aggressive pressure, or if you have no cards in hand, you can bounce it back, Soul Blast, get a draw. But that's really niche. You would have to be losing very hard to really get the draw skill too often. So having it bounce back to hand by itself is fine. The grade 3 lineup, I have been really loving. My current build, which runs 1 Hell Demise, 1 Ancient Scissors. So I love to see that this is being considered. I do like the fact that they're playing more Hell Demise though, because like if you have Ancient Scissors in drop, or if you can't ride Darkface, then you kind of have some other option to give you a Protect gift marker. I really like Protect 2. Honestly, in this format, I don't know what's better. I think Megacolony doesn't really have the hand pressure to really be able to consider running Protect 1 on top of having Draw Sentinels on the deck. Maybe with Cradles, like, they get more hand pressure, though, so I would have to test it to find out. But in this format where rushing is very, 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 very strong, except against Regalia, yeah, it's definitely funky. I don't really need to go too much into the grade 3 lineup. Like, it's a really good lineup. You have the on-play skill for Darkface. You can also call, like, any of these 3 cards from the deck, depending on the situation. Obviously, you can also call High Class Moth with Ghidorah. It's really good. So looking at the G-Zone, I actually really like the G-Zone. I think this is a really good consideration. I like running this G-Guardian lineup. I think running the extra Relish Lady, running 2 instead of 1 is really good because you know this deck is like pretty thin in terms of cost control. So having that option is really good. 2 Morphoshin, obviously a standard because it's a free 25k basically. Merweb, really good card. 1 Overwhelm is interesting. Maybe they just didn't have 4 Melig. The other thing I'm considering is that the opponent, or is that they were, I don't know what they were trying to play around. I'm thinking. I guess it's an option if you don't have any cards in your hand. The only problem I have with that is that in that situation, I would still want to just strike Ghidorah, limit my opponent's movement as much as possible, and because none of your rear guards are going to give you enough. But in a situation where you could draw a lot of cards, it could technically give you a turn to survive. And maybe you survive with enough cards that you're able to stall the opponent out to deck out, or... It depends on the deck. I think the best decks in the format don't really run out of cost that quickly, but I haven't played against demons too much, so this might be a consideration for that. I think the fact that Cradles can operate independently without having to stride is a great example of why this deck would do really well, because it's got a lot of cards that work great against it. I love the Obturandus. I think the Obturandus is a great card, and that if you think that this card doesn't work anymore because it's old, then you are sorely mistaken. The fact is that completely preventing calling rearguards is absolutely correct. There's a lot of decks that dodge around having rearguards, even if they're under Ghidorah. So having the ability to prevent your opponent from attacking with anything else means that like you basically guarantee a draw sentinel against it. Or if you have Brilliant Blister, like the only thing that could get out multiple attacks in that turn is a re-ride mechanic or a superior ride mechanic. So yeah, I think the list overall is really solid. I like some of the tools that are being run. Cleared Breeze especially. I ran Cleared Breeze for a long time before I had 3 Darkus. But yeah. I like this list a lot. I can see why it won. And I think the way the Cradles interact with rearguards early is a big reason why this deck is performing so well. But that's just my theory of it for now. Maybe I'll try to hit this person up. It's bugging me to play. And like kind of see their mentality about playing the deck. They might have just like built it because they saw someone else build it. But I see a lot of consideration for the deck. The S, the Elena, running 4 more Osorio. Like you can tell they were really focusing on trying to get that hand advantage and field advantage out. And then, like, if they were playing into Narukami, then they have Sleep Tug in the Bell. I'm still not sure how this deck would do hand advantage wise because it just does not. Megacolony does not generate hand advantage well enough most of the time, but I don't know. Maybe this build will surprise me. I'll definitely try it out at some point, but that's all I have time for. I do hope everyone has a good day or night, and I'll be talking to you all again later. Goodbye.